Let's start looking at the evaluation and metrics in this first lecture for the authors. Now, the current trend in general is to use less metrics and more quality. This is a trend that just started some time ago. So I'm referring to the evaluation in general, not just only about the authors. More journals and publishers are signing this declaration that is called DORA. You can visit the website sfdora.org. And what they are saying in this declaration is that they are looking for institutions, governments, essentially everyone related to science, to look into the elimination or the reduction in the use of journal-based metrics such as the journal impact factor in funding, appointment, and promotion considerations for the authors, for people. This is a good, is well intentioned. This idea is well intentioned, but the reality is that it is difficult to eliminate. The metrics are difficult to eliminate from the evaluations of the authors because in metrics you have a number, and then it's much easier to use a number to compare with other people than using something that is quality, that is much more difficult to evaluate or to decide exactly how does the quality compares to another people, to another researcher, the work. So the metrics, for this reason, the metrics have only increased over time in the last 15 years or since they were invented, particularly the H index. Having said this, you know that from the evaluation of the journals there are metrics like the impact factor, etc., that I will mention later in section 2 in the journals. So for the evaluation of authors there is something similar, some factors or some metrics that are included or you can use in profiles in research networks, and that they are used for promotions and job search, and also for applications in funding. So this evaluation of authors are in part derived using the researcher's ID, which is what I'm going to mention in this lesson. And then in the next lesson I'm going to describe metrics, purely the metrics, alternative metrics, and analyzing the metrics. But to get into here, first we need to describe the researcher ID. So the author's ID is the researcher identification. So you can take a look at this author profile in Scopus. I suggest that you try first looking into Scopus. You can do a search by last name or by ORCID. If you try by last name, what is going to happen is that you are going to find multiple authors with a last name. You will need to choose institution or other. So you know the ORCID, then it's easier to find for an author profile. And you can also create your own profile if Scopus doesn't have it. Normally you will have an Scopus author ID if you already have published any article that Scopus in a journal that Scopus has indexed. So this comes automatically. Now you can see what the information that you may find when you search for an author profile with the Scopus ID. There is an example. You see the documents of this particular author, the total number of citations, and the H index. And then you can see that this person has a few co-authors, and that this number may be important or not, depending on how you look at how you study the background of the researcher, and obviously the H index. But what I would like to mention here is the fact that this person has been working in different areas, collaborating with different people. So this person has publications in material sciences and chemical engineering, computer, medicine, etc. So you will find this information for each author that is listed in Scopus. There are two other researcher identifications that you can find or use, or that you will be assigned. In the Web of Science, for example, had previously a researcher ID. Now that doesn't exist right now. I think that it's just disappeared. It was transferred to Publons. Web of Science, remember that has automatically assigned a researcher ID to every person that had a publication in one of the journals listed or indexed by Web of Science, the journal citation reports. And this is exactly the same situation with Scopus, right? You are assigned a researcher ID automatically. The reason for this is because obviously they need to know who is the person publishing the article and separate that person from another person with the same name. So that's why they assign automatically a researcher ID. Now, what has become important standard lately is the ORCID. The ORCID is so far most journals do not require ORCID records from corresponding authors, but other journals have made it mandatory for submission. And you go to ORCID, you can create your own account, or your own profile, and you will see that slowly, but sooner or later you will, although it's not mandatory, it will be very convenient for you to have an ORCID if you are publishing many papers. Now, not everything that you publish is reported or covered in Scopus or the Web of Science. Now, small publishers or in areas that are highly specialized in some engineering or other areas, in other languages, so there may be errors in attributions. And so many journals are actually using the ORCID ID as it probably will become the standard identifier. I think they mentioned that there are now 9 million people with ORCID. With ORCIDs. The way to pronounce this is ORCID. So that's what they say, the company says. So this is an example of requirements from some journals to have an ORCID. For example, I'm mentioning here 3. In the case of tissue engineering, the journal Tissue Engineering, they say that the submitting author is required to complete the submission using an ORCID identifier. The same for PILOS. The corresponding author must provide an ORCID ID. The rest not, but I believe it's the same for eLife. And so this is going to become a common standard. Every time that you are submitting a journal to a journal, your article, sooner or later they are going to tell you that you need an ORCID. Now, why is the researcher identification convenient or necessary? This is precisely to properly attribute the work to the researcher. So think about the cases where you may actually need to find someone, or when people may be searching for all your published work, and then they cannot identify you exactly because your name is very similar to other names. Now, it's also important if you need to demonstrate that you were the author of the work published and not another person. So there is an activity later that I will suggest you to do, precisely where I talk about this. And so it's essentially attribution of your work. It's important, and because of the number of people working right now in doing publishing and publishing papers, it has become more and more complicated to identify who is actually the author, or to attribute the work. So you want to have your work attributed to you, and this is the reason that Web of Science and Scopus automatically created a researcher identification for you. But now with the ORCID, most likely the only thing that you will need is to claim or to create your profile with ORCID, and that will be it. So let's continue with the evaluation and metrics, and then the next lesson, I'm going to describe about the use of metrics for the authors.